Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
A New York couple accused of kidnapping their 8 children from foster care are in police custody, but they didn't go quietly.
Thank you, kids.
Yes, I love y'all so much. Y'all know what Mommy doing. Mommy did this for y'all. I love y'all more than anything in this world. And any mother who's going through this, do what you got to do to protect you.
Authorities say 28-year-old Chanel Nadal and 34-year-old Nefra Payne will be charged with kidnapping, custodial interference, and child endangerment. But an attorney representing the couple says he expects his clients to be exonerated. He claims that one of Nadal and Payne's sons was being molested, and the boys' siblings were suffering horrendous abuse during their 2 years in foster care. The kids were taken from a private, non-profit home in New York last week. They were found with their parents in a van parked on a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania street Monday night.
Surveillance was conducted on that van, and at approximately 9:30 p.m., Mr. Payne was located entering the van with 2 children. It was late in the evening. Our initial concern, obviously, was where were the other 6 children.
Officials said the children, who range in age from 11 months to 11 years old, are in good condition. They're being returned to New York, where they'll receive any needed medical care. The couple lost custody of their kids in 2009 because of an abuse allegation. An agency spokesperson says an investigation is underway into how the children could have been taken during a supervised visit. Ross Simpson, The Associated Press.
Welcome. The previous news report was originally broadcast in 2011, but complaints of systemic abuse, corruption, and mismanagement within the New York City Administration for Children's Services, also known as ACS, continue to plague the agency. On March 28, 2011, the New York Post reported, District Attorney Charles Hines charged Damon Adams and Cerise Bell of the city's Administration for Children's Services with criminally negligent homicide on March 23rd for falsifying documents to show visits to victims' home to check on her status had taken place, when, in fact, no one from the city ever showed up at the house. Marcella Brett Pierce, who was born with a medical condition that required her to use feeding and breathing tubes, died on September 2, 2010, after days of torture at the hands of her mother, Carlotta Brett Pierce, who was currently facing life in prison for killing her child. On December 13, 2012, the website DNA Info New York reported 2 former child protection specialists from the city's Administration for Children's Services were arrested Wednesday on charges they submitted false information to the agency about people with records of abuse and neglect. Lola Whitby, 46, and Rosanna Caseda, 42, both of the Bronx, are accused of entering false information into a state-run computer database that investigates neglect and abuse cases. My guests for this episode claim that things have gone from bad to worse at ACS, and they believe the situation has reached a crisis point because foster care in New York City and nationwide has become what they call a business. Dorin Matthews and Sylvia Hooper are the co-founders of Fostering Progressive Advocacy, Inc., or FPA, a Harlem-based organization that provides support services to families, foster parents, and foster youth. For the last several years, they've been relentless in their effort to challenge the policies of ACS and its contracted agencies. They have repeatedly requested meetings with New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, ACS Commissioner Gladys Carrion, and Public Advocate Leticia James, to name a few, in effort to present cases of abuse, incompetence, and illegal activity on the part of ACS and its associated agencies. The G-Man Interviews was able to confirm this after reviewing 17 letters from foster parents, 34 pages in total, that were provided by Matthews and Hooper. The letters were sent to the offices of the aforementioned elected officials and various district representatives. Ms. Matthews received a bachelor's in human services and a master's in social work from Touro College. She has been an adoptive foster parent for the past 11 years and has faced many obstacles and challenges with limited support from foster care agencies. Ms. Hooper received a bachelor's degree in psychology from Adelphi University and obtained a master's in social work from Touro College. Ms. Matthews and Ms. Hooper are partners of United Foster Parents Consultants, LLC. On August 8th of this year, I met the FPA directors at their office to discuss ACS, some of the cases they're handling, and what Ms. Hooper described as a very disturbing incident that took place when she, Ms. Matthews, and a group of foster parents and youth were invited to appear on the ABC talk show Katie, which was hosted by journalist Katie Couric. It's a pleasure to welcome you ladies to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
I'd like to start by having you both provide a little background as far as your experience in the industry and why you started the organization.
Sure. So I was youth in foster care. I was born and raised in the foster care system and didn't have the best experience with a foster family, kinship foster family. And so it made me question at that time, where's the accountability for the caseworkers? Where are the caseworkers when you need them to help you plan your future in terms of college planning and housing and so forth? And I had to do that all on my own. And I know that youth growing up today, if you don't have that innate ability within you to want to motivate yourself and make sure that you have a bright future, it's very dim, and it can feel that way. So once I went on to college, I worked with ACS, foster care, preventive, and really wanted to get a hands-on experience with the system. And just realized that there's so much injustice going on, that there's so many loopholes that are being overlooked. There's so many families that are in crisis that are not really getting the help and assistance that they need, families that are being torn apart. And so I really felt a need to give back and to give families the experience that I wanted to have and give them a voice and give them an advocate, someone that can really fight for their rights.
Hi, my name is Dorin Matthews. I am a foster adopted parent. I got into the foster care system because my nephews were placed in foster care, so I became a kinship foster parent. After that, I worked for a foster care agency in Harlem, Children's Village. I went on to work for preventive services, but as my role as a foster parent advocate for Children's Village, I saw that there was a lot of injustices going on inside the foster care agency. The foster youth inside the agency were not getting their supportive services. The foster parents wasn't getting support. So this is where I met Sylvia Hooper during that time.
And it was because of the experience that you both had that you decided to launch this organization.
Yes.
And when did you launch it?
April 2008.
And how was the organization funded?
We're an independent grassroots organization. We do our own fundraisers, and we do apply for some social justice grants.
When I went online and I had the opportunity to look at some of the videos and read some of the information pertaining to foster care system and some of the, I guess for lack of a better term, gripes that you have with it, it was indicated that you considered foster care to be a business. Could you elaborate on that?
It is a business. Everyone that's involved, government officials, agencies, ACS, there's money that is being shuffled around. So the longer a child stays in foster care, the more money that's being generated. Once a child is adopted out, more money is being given back to the agency. So there's an incentive for a child to linger in foster care as opposed to a child being placed and immediately have services put in place to have the child be reunited back with the birth families. So we say it's a business because really it goes against what the concrete mission of foster care is, which is a temporary placement, and it's supposedly based upon the best interest of a child. And I think in most instances when a child is removed from the home, the decisions are made very hastily, and also it's being used as a bias against families, particularly families of color. When you go into communities of Black and Hispanic families, low income, poor, there's certain assumptions that are placed upon these communities, upon these people, where people feel that the children are not being fed, that they're being abused, that they're being neglected, that the parents just don't give a damn. And that's not the case. You know, there are times where families are struggling and where there's a need for help, you know, to connect them to services, to get the family to the next plateau, you know, whether it be the parents receiving educational services or job placement, or help with housing, or even just help with planning or organizing. But I think it really has become a business because people aren't really looking at the concrete psychosocial issues that are happening with families. They're really looking at the monetary benefits for themselves, and they're not really looking at how this family is going to be sacrificed and interrupted and affected in the long run.
Now, as far as money being provided to these agencies like ACS, these are federal funds, correct?
Yeah.
There are a number of news reports that have come out over the years indicating that workers have been engaged in illegal practices, like if a child ends up being unfortunately killed or something, and maybe the caseworker didn't do their due diligence and follow up or act accordingly. I believe you stated, Ms. Matthews, that some foster care workers actually either show up late or they're doing all kinds of stuff. Now, this being the case, if these agencies are being given federal funds, wouldn't that warrant a federal investigation of some type? And if so, why hasn't one been conducted up to this point?
Well, the Administration for Children's Services, they have a monitor that monitors each contracted foster care agency, but they're covering this up because there's a lot of things that are going inside these contracted agencies, such as you got some caseworkers falsifying documents, not making visits, but they're putting it inside the connection notes. So this is where, like you said, you can launch a federal investigation and even contact the Inspector General's office to open up some type of federal investigation against these contracted agencies, because the Administration for Children's Services seems to be siding with the contracted agencies. They're covering these issues up.
And how long would you say this has been going on?
Decades. This has been going on for decades because, to me, the foster care system is a failed system. It does not benefit our children and families. And you can do the research. You'll see 40% of the homeless population are youth aging out of the foster care system. 70% of the prison system is former foster care youth. So how could foster care be a system that's benefiting these young people when they're coming out of foster care and they're going right into another system? So you have the Administration for Children's Services and the contracted foster care agencies receiving all of this federal money. They're supposed to be putting in all these initiatives to support these young people, but you got a lot of failed outcomes, and there is no oversight. There's no checks and balances at the end of the day, because I strongly believe that the Administration for Children's Services wants to sugarcoat and paint a picture of the Administration for Children's Services doing a great job to support children and families, which that is not the case.
Would it be fair to say that this situation dates back pre-Giuliani administration?
Yeah, you can say that.
When we worked at Children's Village, I had actually contacted the monitor of that agency at ACS, and so I contacted the monitor. We also contacted the mayor's office as well as the news, Channel 7 News, and they came out and they did an investigation. But of course, these agencies have been around for 20, 30 years. They know how to cover up stuff. When people come in and they do audits and they do investigations, notes that hadn't been there miraculously appear. You know, documentation to support their efforts miraculously appear all of a sudden. You know, when they call the families, the caseworkers, if you speak to the foster parents, we have foster parents that have stated to us that the caseworkers will call them and say, listen, if the agency calls you and asks you if I've done a home visit, please tell them I was just there yesterday. Please tell them I've been visiting for the past 6 months, because both you and I know I haven't. You know, and this is not something that's just been happening as of recent. This has been happening for a long time. And so because caseworkers feel like they can get away with it, it's just going to continue to happen because they feel like there's no accountability. No one's really doing any checks and balances, and that's really what's scary. And it's not until a child dies, until there's a fatality, that all of a sudden the dirty laundry is aired. But then even then, they still won't admit that they dropped the ball on a particular case or that they didn't do all the diligent efforts. They still won't admit that even to that point.
And have you, either of you, tried to bring this to the attention of your local elected officials? And if so, what has been their response?
We have brought it to their attention. You know,
is anyone you can name specifically?
We've met with a variety of different local officials.
Public
to be quite
Advocate's
honest.
office.
Yeah.
Okay. We've been to the
Different
Public Advocate's office, Leticia James. So we were supposed to have a meeting to sit down with her personally. That hasn't happened yet. We reached out to the Administration for Children's Services to try to get a meeting for Tracy Breaker's case. They didn't want to sit down with us at that meeting. We spoke to council members in the 5 boroughs. When Charles Barron was in, oh my God, how many council? Annabelle Palmer.
So you have made diligent attempts.
Yeah, so many council members. Inez Dickinson's office. You know, we've been to a lot of different council people, and what I see is that the council members, this issue it's fell on deaf ears at this particular time. They don't want to address these foster care issues. You know why? Because they're funding these foster care agencies. So if you got elected officials that's giving them discretionary funds, it makes the officials look bad at the end of the day, knowing that they're giving these agencies money and they're not doing their job. But at the same time, they're not even looking into investigations. If you go to a council member and you tell him, look, this is what's going on, they don't even look into it because everybody has a partnership with the Administration for Children's Services. When we spoke to Annabelle Palmer's office, she's a council member that does support our program, they set up a meeting for us to speak to the Administration for Children's Services. We got to the meeting, and you know what the meeting was about? They're introducing the departments. We know how the departments ran, so why are we here going over departments when we came here to address the issues that are happening to the children and families in the community? So I think there's a partnership that's going on. A lot of elected officials have a big partnership with the Administration for Children's Services. There are other organizations that have partnered with ACS. A lot of people don't want to bite the hand that's feeding them because they're giving them money. Everybody's getting this federal money or getting a contract from ACS. So when you have a system of organizations, nonprofit organizations that are all have that partnership, even though they know it's wrong, they're not going to go against the Administration for Children's Services. To me, it's a lot of corruption. It's a lot of cover-ups. And we need to hold people accountable. Like I said, we need to hold the council members accountable. We're waiting on Public Advocate Leticia James. She had 3,200 complaints about the Administration for Children's Services since she's been in the office since January. You know, we want to know, what are you doing? What are you doing about the Administration for Children's Services? You know, I voted for her. I thought that, you know, she was going to step up and handle these situations, but it just seems like she sided with them too as a public advocate. And her job is to make sure that she looked into government corruption. And I don't see, if you got 3,200 complaints from the 5 boroughs, what are you doing? What is your plan to want to address this issue? And why haven't you took the time to sit down with our organization, an organization that's trying to let you know about the corruption or trying to get you involved to take action against the Administration for Children's Services and these contracted agencies? I think, you know, even Mayor Bill de Blasio, you know, I sent a letter to everybody at this particular time. I honestly think that this issue has been swept up under the rug because the corruption is just so big. Everybody has their hand in it. You know, the attorney for children, the judges, you know, everybody's getting federal money and they're not looking out for the best interests of minority families. It's a lot of African American and it's a lot of Latino families that are being affected. They don't know their rights at the end of the day. They're terminating their rights and putting their children up illegally for adoption. So it's another genocide. It's like, you know, to me, it's like child trafficking. You're taking the children from poor families and putting them up for adoption so that you guys can receive this federal money. And everybody knows about it, but no one is saying anything about it. Even in the courts, everything is confidential. ACS always talking about something that's confidential. But it's not confidential when you cause the injustice, when you violate the rights of the parents, when you violate the rights of the foster youth, when you violate the rights of the parents. It's not confidential then, but then when you want to bring these issues to light, no one wants to talk about how they have caused this injustice toward the children and families.
Speaking of violating the rights of the families, you mentioned Tracy Breaker. Could you provide an overview or a summary of that particular case?
Yes, Tracy Breaker is a kinship aunt, and she's a kinship foster parent. So she's a kinship foster parent with Mercy Foster Care Agency in Brooklyn. The agency gave her 3 of her nieces and nephews, but refused to give her a 4th child. The 4th child name is Lorenzo Mason. Now, Lorenzo Mason was living with Mrs. Breaker's mother, the grandmother, but there was a false allegation that caused him to be removed. Now, during the removal, he should have been placed with Ms. Breaker, but the caseworker didn't do so because the caseworker had a personal vendetta against Ms. Breaker, so she placed Lorenzo with a stranger, with a foster parent. So during that time, she didn't let Ms. Breaker see Lorenzo. There was no contact with Lorenzo. Every time Ms. Breaker would call the agency, they wasn't calling her back. So she reached out to us for support. So what we did, we took Ms. Breaker on the Here and Now show to expose Mercy First, and that's when we spoke to them and they decided to have visitation, and she started seeing Lorenzo. But now the agency is still stating that they want to put him up for adoption now. That is a violation of the child welfare laws. There's a state law called Ask for the Adoption Family and Safe Act law, where families are supposed to be kept together, siblings should not be separated. And this agency, Mercy First, is doing that, and they don't have no reason why they're separating Lorenzo from his family. If Ms. Breaker was good to get the other 3 children, why wouldn't you not place Lorenzo in her home? This doesn't make sense to us.
In setting up this interview, you also indicated that the media hasn't been doing a very good job as well. And there were 2 cases in particular that you cited. One involved a special report by journalist Lisa Ling, and there was an incident that occurred on the Couric show. I'd like you to talk about this.
We were contacted by Couric show. We were asked to come on the show to talk about foster care experience with both foster parents and youth that we work with. So we were excited to have this opportunity to talk candidly about what's really going on behind closed doors within the New York City foster care system. And then once we went on to the set of the show, we were told that we're just going to be sitting in the audience, and that they had selected some other youth and foster parents from California. And so when they shared their stories were all success stories, which is wonderful to hear, but it's not realistic. It's not everyone's story. Not every child that's in foster care is going to be successful, nor have they been. As Dorin mentioned earlier, that a lot of the youth are actually aging out and becoming homeless. When you talk about this within the realm of the council members or ACS or anyone that's involved in the foster care system professionally, no one wants to talk about that. No one wants to talk about the failed outcomes of children in foster care. And so I was really taken back and really appalled at the fact that we were deceived in terms of what our role was going to be that day. You know, we had a group of foster parents and youth with us who anticipated on sharing their experience. And that did not happen that day. And what we did get to do was share our stories and experiences during the commercial break. And so when one of our youths was sharing her very touching personal story, she was very emotional about it because she is currently now in foster care, was on the verge of aging out, and discussing how she's fearful of becoming homeless because the agency has not helped her at all for the 8 years that she has been in foster care. And she had just joined our organization, and so we were on the very cusp of, her situation. And so as she was sharing her story, and she was crying as she was talking, the members of the audience were very intrigued by her story. However, Couric and Lisa Ling could care less because they were taking pictures, it was their photo op moment, and they didn't even take a moment to take a step back and look at this young woman that is standing before them who is currently in foster care and expressing her situation about how the system has failed her. They could care less to take the moment out to hear her story, to show empathy, to express any type of interest in what's happening, or even offer any type of assistance to her.
So Lisa Ling was a special guest in this particular episode?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought it was a separate incident. Okay. Continue.
Yes. I'm sorry. So there was a panel of foster youths, and then they had selected a group of a couple of foster parents, and Lisa Ling had done a documentary on this, and she had followed this couple that were a foster parent family together. And so neither one of them could care less about, the experiences that the foster parents were sharing, nor the youth. And really, the youth in particular, that really was disturbing to me, because if, as a human being, as a woman, as someone that's a journalist that's supposedly supposed to care about different issues, you're on a show discussing how this really impacted you and how, you weren't aware of how the foster care system was until you started this documentary. But to hear from a youth that's right here in New York, not someone that's out of state, and not feel compelled to want to help, I didn't understand that. I didn't understand what was the point of us being there, or what their true intentions really were in airing that story.
If you had an opportunity to meet with Governor Andrew Cuomo or Mayor Bill de Blasio to offer a one-step, two-step, three-step plan to overhaul the foster care system in New York City, or possibly the nation, so what would you introduce?
I would say accountability.
Yeah.
We need for people to be held accountable for their actions. And a lot of these situations that the children and families are going through is because of the lack of efforts on the caseworker's part. A lot of people drop the ball. And if they were serious about helping children and families, they would put the services, they would do what's right for that child or do what's right for that parent. So I think accountability is needed. Someone needs to go in there and do an investigation and just look at the paperwork and talk to the families that are in these agencies, not to the workers. Contact all the parents and the youth that are in the agencies and find out what's really happening. Because most of the time, 90%, the people that they're servicing will tell you that they're not being helped by these foster care agencies. They have advocates right now. They got parent advocates. That's with the child welfare system that advocates for the parents. And they do have foster parent advocates. Now, I'm explaining this to you. I think it is a conflict of interest to have a foster parent advocate with the foster care agencies, because they're not going to be able to advocate for that foster parent. Because if they go against an agency, they can be terminated. So it has to be an outside group like us, outside advocates, holding them accountable, being neutral. And I don't really see that. All of this advocacy, but everybody has the partnership to the foster care system or the foster care agency. So they're not really helping the parents. So you got advocates that are saying they're real advocates, but they really have failed these families. If they go above and beyond to help them, they will be terminated. I was in that situation as a foster parent advocate working for Children's Village. When I try to hold them accountable, they want to terminate me. You better not take a foster parent down to 150 Williams. So where does the children and family go for support? And I'm not talking about Office of Advocacy, because the Office of Advocacy on 150 William Street is supposed to be where you can make a complaint against any agency. But what I find with the Office of Advocacy is that they're supposed to be a neutral party. Sometimes they favor with the agency, and sometimes they're referring their clients to us. So if you're referring your clients to us, what's the purpose of the Office of Advocacy when you're referring them to an outside group? And then there's been times when we go to meetings at the Office of Advocacy and they're supposed to be neutral, but it seems like they're not. Like, you're angry at us because we're present as an outside group coming in to want to help the families. We give them consent forms. They don't want to give us the decisions. It's like they do everything to work against this outside group that's coming in to help, but you're claiming you're the Office of Advocacy and you're here to be a neutral party and you're here to give resources to the children and families. But then when you have an outside advocacy group come into a meeting, an independent review hearing, you're giving us a hard way to go to get a attendance sheet, to get a copy of the decision. Everybody else in the hearing gets a copy of the decision. Why can't we get one? And we gave you a consent form from our client saying that we can receive the decision. So it's just been a lot of conflict back and forth, and I question the Administration for Children's Service. I question the contracted agencies because they putting it out there that, oh, we want to work in partnership with agencies and groups. That's what they partners, not with us, because we're holding them accountable. And until you have other groups stepping up, really holding the Administration for Children's Services accountable, you're going to continue to have this type of corruption because no one wants to hold them accountable or holding the foster care agencies accountable. So when you have a system where there's no checks and balances, you have thousands of children and families being torn apart, and it's just not right. Why should Tracy Breaker, her nephew, be put up for adoption knowing he has a family member? That is an injustice, and she's not the only one. We have another case, Trisha Rowan. They did the same thing to her. The caseworker didn't like her. Removed the 3 children and then separated them. You're not supposed to be separating siblings. They're supposed to be kept together. But if you speak to Administration for Children's Services, you speak to the Associate Commissioner, Benita Miller, she has a nasty disposition, and her position, oh, every case is an individual, it's confidential, but it's not confidential in the way what you're doing to these families, violating their rights. They don't even know where the foster parent manual is at. The parents don't even get policy and procedure. And then the attorneys that are in the courts, the attorney for the child or the parent's attorneys are working against them too. So what type of foster care system is this where the people that you're supposed to be helping, no one is in their corner, so they feel hopeless. They feel lost at the end of the day. If they make a complaint at the ACS Office of Advocacy, nobody doing nothing about it. So where do they go for help? You know, there has to be an outside group, like we said, the Inspector Attorney General's office. We're looking into that now to see if we can start having open up some cases on these agencies, because it's just not right that families are being torn apart, not being reunified, and there's no accountability. And even the council members, they're not even holding the Administration for Children's Services accountable. Everybody wants FBA Foundation to go away, but we're not going to go away. We're going to keep raising this awareness in the community. We're going to keep educating the community, because this is an epidemic. It's a crisis in the 5 boroughs. It's a national issue. If you go on YouTube and you do the research, do you know how many children and families are being separated from their family members for a forced allegation case? And it's neglect most of the time. And for neglect, the child should be placed back with the family member. I can understand if it was real physical abuse, but if you have a parent who complied, who did anger management, who completed her service plan, and you still turn around and drag her for the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, because your agency really wants to get the federal money, you're not working in the best interest of the parent. You're not working in the best interest of the child. You're not working in the best interest of the foster parent. So who's benefiting? It's the agencies that's benefiting. Just like foster children being put on medication. That's another epidemic. They don't talk about this. How many foster children they're putting on psychotropic medication from ages 3 to 9? I'm talking about 3, 4, 5 different types of psychotropic medication. These kids should not be diagnosed as bipolar. They're too young to have that diagnosis. And every medication has a side effect, which they're not talking about. You know, who's protecting the rights of these foster children once they become the state's property, or become the state becomes their parent? So they're still being abused. Yeah, they're still being abused because they're under the state's care. And no one's holding the state accountable, such as OCFS, ACFS. Everybody's covering these things up. You know, I just want to know, like the mayor, you know, he needs to look at this stuff. I went to the mayor when he was the public advocate, and he swept this under the rug. Back in 2005, they had this thing called the guinea pig experiments, where they were taking foster children that had HIV, and they were doing illegal experiments. It was the Administration for Children's Services and Columbia University had these experiments going on in Washington Heights. You could do the research. And 80 children died as a result of these experiments. And they tried to blame it on the HIV. But that wasn't the case. It was the trials of the medication, which you were doing to these foster children. So God knows what other arrangements or what the Administration for Children's Services are doing with children who don't have parents when they don't have a voice. These kids are falling through the cracks and being victimized by the system that claims to protect them.
Super, I'll give you the last word.
I think that a lot of people will admit that it's a failed system, but they would rather focus on the success stories. There's very few success stories, and so it's easier to focus on the few children that have made it out, that have gone on to college or that are working and have housing. It's very easy to focus on those cases and to blame the children and to make it their fault of their own that they weren't successful in aging out of foster care, that they didn't make the best of the situation. But how could they if they didn't know what their rights were, that they didn't know what was afforded to them while in foster care, if they didn't have caseworkers that, as human service agents, really sat down with the child and said, let's really sit down and plan your future. How can I best help you? What is it that you need? Because you didn't ask to be in this system. But let's make the best of this situation. Let's make the most of this opportunity, because there are a lot of things that are afforded to you that we can benefit from. You know, scholarships. There's housing that can be afforded to them. But it's easy for people to dismiss that, though. You know, I think a lot of people in the community are not aware of what's really going on in the foster care system. There's an assumption that because a child has been removed from their biological home, their birth family, that by being placed into foster care, it's a better scenario, it's a better outcome. And that's not always the case. Yes, we're an organization that advocates for foster parents, but there are some foster parents out here that should not be foster parenting. They should not have been licensed because of lack of knowledge, lack of having their own income, and so they're misusing the funds that are being given to them that's supposed to be used explicitly for the child that's in their home, but instead they're not. You know, I've seen it where we've had children that are in foster care suffering at the hands of the foster parents, neglected at the hands of the foster parents, abused at the hands of the foster parents. And the agencies are not always consistent and across the board. Again, it goes back to the bias. If you're a foster parent that does not have a personal relationship with your caseworker or the director in the agency, they're going to call in a false allegation against you. Sometimes rightfully so, sometimes not. Or if you do have a great relationship with the agency and you're a foster parent of the year, if you do commit a crime, they're going to try to help you cover it up. And they'll refer you to an organization such as ours to really make sure that your name is cleared because you're their token foster parent. So, you know, I say that because not all of the youths are being helped. Again, it's about whether they like you or not, whether they feel like doing it that day, whether they're in the mood to do it. And the foster parents, it's about a personal bias also. And so where does that leave families? You're kind of in this gray area where you really don't know who to trust, who to go to, who to depend upon. And if you don't know what your rights are, how can you then advocate for the youth that's in your home? So it is a failed system. Yes, there have been some success stories, thank God, but there needs to be more, and more can be done. But if we continue to ignore and dismiss the issue, then we're going to continue to have crime. We're going to continue to overpopulate the criminal justice system. And is this really what we want for our African American and Hispanic children? Is this all that they are capable of? Is this all that we have to offer them on this earth? That is a shame.
70% of people that are in prison were foster care.
Absolutely. They go right from foster care to the juvenile justice system and then on to the criminal justice system. Why? Because no one paid attention to them. Because no one answered their questions. Because no one took the time out to cultivate this young person. Like I said earlier, not every youth has it within them, that inner motivation to want to get an education, to want more for themselves. Some kids grow up feeling that it's their fault that they're in foster care. Some kids grow up in systems and communities and educational systems that aren't really paying attention to them, aren't really taking the time out to teach them, to mentor them, to be role models, to really see how this child is doing, not just right here in front of you in the school system, but at home. We're not having the checks and balance around all ends. We're not having that village mentality of raising a child anymore. And so people have just kind of left it to where kids are at their own device. And how can a young person be responsible for ensuring their own livelihood, to ensure that they're going to be a successful adult when they haven't been raised to be a successful child? And we haven't given them all that they need to be able to be independent, to know what it is to succeed, to know what it is to fail, and to know that even though you failed, you can still triumph. These kids feel that because they're within this system, that it's a death sentence and that there's no positive outcomes for them. We already have so many children that feel that way that are not in the foster care system, but purely because they are Black and Hispanic kids and they live in low-income communities. They already feel that there's so much more that they have to do, so much more of an effort that they have to make in order to be successful. So topping that with being in foster care, it really takes all of us to ensure that these kids feel empowered, that they feel loved, that they feel supported, and that they feel that everyone's going to be involved in making sure that you graduate from middle school, you graduate from high school, you go on to college, and that you get that opportunity that you should have been given. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that this foster care system is working appropriately, to make sure that it is working in the best interest of families and what that really means. The best interest of the child or the family is not your best interest. It should be what's really going to impact this family in the long run in a positive way. And so if we don't continue to look at that, if we just continue to dismiss it, we're going to continue to fail. And as social workers, as counselors, as people that are human beings that are supposed to love and be a community, this is not how it's supposed to operate whatsoever.
For those who listen to this interview and they may want to contact your organization either to contribute in some way or to seek assistance, how can they contact you?
They can call us on our office number at 646-402-6133. They can also reach us on our website at www.fpa, that's F as in Frank, P as in Peter, A as in Apple, foundation.org.
Ladies, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and I wish you continued success in your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.